Welcome back to another episode of Debunking Missionary Claims. Fair Weights and Measures, answers to Dr. Michael Brown's book. Again, this is going to be the last segment in this series. So if you've been enjoying it, you're going to want to tune in again next week. Next week, we're going to start a whole new series. It's going to deal with specifically addressing the New Testament. So sit tight, and we will be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Debunking Missionary Claims with Rabbi Moshe Shulman. Welcome back, Rabbi. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you've had a great week. I know I have been a little challenging from time to time with all the studio fun stuff, but we'll eventually get this thing rocking and rolling. It's nice to see you again, Rabbi.
Okay, it's nice to see you too.
Very good, sir.
Or hear you.
Yeah, hear me. Can't really see on the other side of the glass. That's all right, though. All right, we got this. All right, so I'm going to follow you along best I can. So why don't you tell us where we're headed tonight?
Okay, this is actually our 8th session. It's the 6th dealing with Dr. Brown's lecture, 1991 lecture on unequal weights and measures. And this is our conclusion. So let me just go over what we did until now. And then I will bring Dr. Brown's conclusions, what I have to say about his conclusions, and then I will give you a issue here about feel. Essentially, the major underlying theme in Dr. Brown was, of course, anti-missionary ethics and how they act. So I definitely want to bring what I have to say. But let's just discuss exactly what we did before. In these previous sessions, we dealt Dr. Brown in his particular discussion here. What he said was that there were 3 particular areas which counter-missionaries are basically hypocritical in their criticisms of the New Testament and of Christianity. One is hyperliterality. The second is dealing with contradictions. And the third is dealing with distorted texts, in texts that are incorrect. What I've maintained and discussed throughout here is we've discussed some of them. Some of the things he said about the New Testament, what we complain about the New Testament, some of the things that he says about rabbinic writings, and the point that I was making were actually 2 things. Number one, we're not really dealing with anything unequal. Both questions of the New Testament and of the Jewish writings and the Tanakh, whatever, these are legitimate questions that need to be looked at seriously. The attempt to delegitimize those objections that counter-missionaries may say, even some of these objections actually appear in works by Christians who are dealing with difficult passages. They're not illegitimate. In fact, they need to be addressed by anybody who is involved in polemics, or anybody who's really trying to find out what their faith is about, Christianity is about, and they have to be looked at seriously. The second point being is that we're not dealing with the issue of unequal or equal. What we're really dealing with is the question of truth. What is the truth? Is this question based on truth? What's a truthful answer? And in some cases, it ends up that we draw upon different things as to what we consider to be valuable and what to be truthful. Dr. Brown, in his book, of course, cites rabbinic writings because, of course, as Orthodox Jews, we, of course, revere our rabbinic writings and give them a truth value. And Dr. Brown gives a truth to the New Testament. But when we're dealing with people, we have to deal with things on what people they both hold. So, for example, we have to discuss the Tanakh, what the Tanakh holds, and hold back on our other beliefs. Now, that's basically what we discussed about till now. So I'd like to go into Dr. Brown's conclusions himself. He concludes, this is both a lecture and a written text. So he gives basically 5 conclusions. And I would like to discuss each one of these conclusions as to whether I think his conclusion from his either follows from what he says or is even true. The first one is this. First thing he says, first, there are answers. But but only for the sympathetic and open. Now, this is very interesting. As I pointed out, among the other problems that there is, for example, in Stephen in the book of Acts, Act 7, where he says that Jacob bought Shechem from Hamor, an acknowledged error, and we see that even in Christian sources, they find it very difficult to answer that question. In fact, some just throw up their hands and say, have to realize that Stephen just made a mistake there. So, and another one that I brought up, which we will deal with again, is a disagreement between the Synoptic Gospels and John as to when Jesus was crucified. Sometimes there are no answers. So appealing to somebody to be sympathetic is basically say, listen, just because it doesn't appear to be any answer, you should just believe it and forget about it. It's not a problem, not worry about it. Which is essentially the exact opposite of what we're doing when we're involved in apologetics and polemics one with another, whether discussing Judaism or whether discussing Christianity. If you are reading a work which discusses this, you have to be prepared that, in fact, either you don't look at the book at all or just go ahead with your life, and a lot of Christians obviously do that. But if you are really a truth seeker, which is what we're really talking about, if you want to know what the truth is, then you want to investigate all these things, find out, does it have an answer or not? If it doesn't, like, for example, with Stephen, or with the synoptic issue between John and the synoptics as to when the crucifixion was, you have to think to yourself as to whether that's really important or not. Okay? And the truth of the matter is, when you do see polemical literature, apologetic literature from the Christian side, in many issues, that's exactly what they're going to say. That, yeah, this is a problem, but it's not important. And what we have to do is it something important? So when he says you have to be sympathetic, what does it mean sympathetic? Sympathetic is not what we're looking at. What we're looking at is fairness. Look at it objectively. Is it the same? Is it the truth? Is the answer really make sense, or is it an answer that you don't like and you have to try and either deal with it? Now, he goes on here and discusses that use the same methodology can provide answers to the Old Testament rabbinic problems. Well, that's not actually the case. As we pointed out before, there are actually instances in which we recognize that there are actually errors in the Talmud. For example, when we talked about the passage in Tractate Bruchas where a rabbi brought a text which doesn't exist, our rabbis actually deal with it forthright and truthful and say, text doesn't exist. And for us, it didn't make a difference because in that particular passage is actually a secondary text, which does prove the point that it was supposed to be made by the first text. And even if not, we don't have the type of inerrancy type of issue that it bothers us as such. That's why we don't have problems with a lot of issues that come up. And anybody who's learned a lot of halacha, as I have, and has seen different things, knows that these things come up every once in a while. We just, deal with it based on certain principles that we have, which are ones that Dr. Brown, I'm sure, does not accept. And we'll get into some of these things when we talk actually about Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, and what we believe and why. And I will give a logical approach and explaining exactly as to why Orthodox Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, is not only the true religion, but it's a logical religion and one that, in fact, is following the instructions and the desires of God. Okay, that was the first one. Now, before I go on, I want to point out that his first conclusion here doesn't follow from anything that he said. He never really made an argument here that everything has an answer. He just said that if we don't have answers, you don't have answers either. Or you have problems, we have problems also. But he didn't say that everything has an answer. His assumption was that if he would ask a question to a rabbinic Jew, that the rabbinic Jew said, well, there's an answer for that. So obviously he says, well, you have answers, we have answers. But the truth of the matter is that there are many things we don't have answers. Many things we will admit that are wrong, as I pointed out in the Tractate Bruchas. So his whole point here is actually incorrect. It does not exist. Now, if he wants to say that things have answers because he feels that he has answers, that's fine, but that means just that his answers are subject to investigation, and you, as an individual who is a truth seeker, wants to be a truth seeker, is going to have to look and say, well, does that answer really make sense, or is it what we call an ad hoc answer? An ad hoc means that you just throw it up in the midst of a debate but it really doesn't address what the issue is. And that's very important, is when we deal in polemics and apologetics, we have to understand, is Dr. Brown or any other apologist throwing up an ad hoc answer, which is really just as a smokescreen, or is it really an answer that has a certain degree of depth? Okay, the second one that he brings, second, seemingly strange interpretation. Excuse me. The second was actually, I already said before, is that we use the same methodology. And as I pointed out, in fact, that's not the case. When Dr. Brown asks me something that might be contradiction within Rabbinic Judaism, I will appeal, of course, to Rabbinic Jewish texts, knowing that Dr. Brown, of course, does not accept them as being valid, truth, or whatever, but I need only be consistent within my own beliefs, as far as that's concerned. When trying to bring the truth of the Tanakh, I have to bring the truth from the Tanakh itself. And we will see the interplay between the Tanakh and rabbinic stuff when we actually when we discuss the rabbinic objections of Dr. Brown in his 5th book, and I will in fact spend time there with a lot of time there. I will actually spend in apologetics for rabbinic Judaism. Okay, so actually now we're on the third one. The third one that I have here, which actually is called second, but it's actually the third thing. Seemingly strange interpretations should be seen in the light of larger contextual themes, sometimes even reflecting Targumic or possibly, and on occasion, Midrashic liberties. Okay, this has to do with the way you look at the verses and stuff like that. And when we get into biblical interpretation, we'll discuss more about this. Dr. Brown does have a list of things that, as far as interpretation, I will go through point by point. The only thing I will say about this is 2 points here. Number one, seemingly strange interpretations, if they are strange to you, then they require a little bit more. For Dr. Brown to appeal to Midrashic commentary, it again depends on where it's being used and what it's being used for. I mean, this will be a discussion we'll have before again. But again, rabbinic Jews do not look at the Tanakh, and Christians who believe in sola scriptura do not look at the Tanakh and the New Testament the same way. We rabbinic Jews, we have traditions that are outside of the text. As I pointed out, Josephus says specifically that we have traditions that have been handed down to us that are not specifically in the text. Some cases, and even it's not even hinted in the text itself, but these are our traditions. As a Christian himself who holds the sola scriptura, who holds that the truths are within the text, the biblical text, both the Old and New Testament, appeals to such traditions would not fly. Whereas a Christian, a Catholic, by the way, or Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, or one of the other Orthodox religions, which believe in a concept called magisterium, that the interpretation and understanding of text belongs to the church, they would have a different way of approaching it. And in a discussion with them, of course, we'd have to deal with it. But to deal specifically with the majority of Christians who will be listening to me, certainly Messianics, that's really not true. If it's a strange interpretation, you have to justify as to why you are making an appeal to saying that it's midrashic as opposed to being supposed to be understood literally. So again, this is not something he actually proved here, and it's not something that's actually true. I'm not going to say it's totally false, because certainly there's some things that we can appeal to that, but then the implications of that, of course, for that are very severe, because after all, a midrashic interpretation of a text, which is not based on what the text actually says, would certainly be rejected by any Christian. And is certainly not a valid thing for me to bring up as an Orthodox Jew, even if I believe in the truth of that particular medrash. It certainly doesn't prove a point of what the verse means. And if I'm involved in an argument with a Christian, I can't bring that up because it really doesn't fly. Okay, third was my fourth one. We can gain insight into how best to deal with the Talmud or even the Quran, albeit to much less degree, must be fair to the text, seeking to understand through the eyes of the transmitters or interpreters. That is actually very correct. This is a correct point, which I agree with, and we'll talk about it more as we go along. But that is correct. And you will see that as we progress, especially in the next unit, not the next unit, but the next lecture series that we're going to do about the New Testament, I've spent a lot of time learning what evangelical scholars of the New Testament text have said about many of these issues, clarifying where they actually hold on it and we're discussing some of those things. So he's actually correct. It's very important that when you do discuss the New Testament and you do discuss things like that, that you should understand where it's coming from, the background, and many things like that. When we go into the Trinity, we're going to discuss a lot about the background from Philo and Hellenic Judaism, or Hellenicized Judaism from Egypt, and of course Paul, who lived outside of Palestine, which wasn't as Hellenic, would have held. And we'll see what these kinds of things come up. But yes, this point is correct. Again, he didn't quite say anything in his text about it, but there's certainly a point which I would agree with. Fine. And the fourth one is very interesting. Finally, we must adopt a totally non-defensive posture when dealing with the anti-missionaries. And he continues to say this: the truth is with us, and unethical practices are doomed to fail. Okay, first of all, he assumes the truth is with him. But again, he gets involved in debates, and anybody listening to issues like this, the point of the matter is what he's saying the truth? And that's what our whole point of the matter is. Our whole discussion is that we contend that the truth is not with him. Now, to have the feeling when you go into a discussion that you believe the truth is with you, you can't really listen to the other side. I know that when I look into subjects from Christians, I suspend my own beliefs and try and say, okay, what does this person believe? Why does he believe this to be true? And when I totally understand that, then I can then analyze this. And we're going to see how this plays out actually in the future. When I go into discussion of the Trinity incarnation, I'm going to actually spend time with you explaining it to the point that I hope that those listening to this who might even be, disbelievers, in that, Jews like me, can actually begin to see that, some of it actually seems to make sense, okay? And then we'll destroy that. But that's beside it. So taking a non-defensive position really is somewhat foolish. If you're involved in the discussion with an anti-missionary, you are basically involved in an adversarial situation. Just as if I'm in a conversation with a Christian, it's an adversarial situation. And depending on what the issue is, of course you're going to be defensive. That's absolutely absurd to say otherwise. That's really not the way it works. So those are the 5 points that he said. One point I agree with. The rest of them I don't really agree with. And that's basically the sum total of what Dr. Brown said. What I'd like to do here first is say what I think the proper conclusions are from Dr. Brown's lecture. His point being that there's a possibility here involved where counter-missions are being hypocritical. I do not believe that that's the case, however, but I do think we should discuss it. And I think the proper conclusion of what he says is very simple. Number one, you should fairly judge the other side. That means when I approach a Christian text, New Testament or whatever, and look at it, I critique it, engage the other side, whether it's Dr. Brown or somebody else, and really try and get into his kishkes, into his guts, and understand what does he really believe? Where is this coming from? Where is he getting this from? What is this thing? Is it just he just believes it because the New Testament says so, or is there some kind of logical argument that's involved in it? That's number one. Number two, I think the proper conclusion from this unequal weights and measures is really that you should not impose your belief system on somebody else. When I speak to a Christian, speaking about the New Testament or something where we have disputes in Christianity, or where Christian disagrees with a certain passage in the Tanakh, for example, I do not appeal to my own beliefs. I appeal to an objectivity. I look for objectivity, something that both people look at, simply understanding the text in a way, ignoring what either the New Testament or the rabbis say, and say, listen, let the text speak. What is the text actually saying? If that's possible to do, then of course we can come to conclusions. Sometimes it may not be possible to do, in which case there'll be disagreement. And we can't come to a conclusion as far as that's concerned, but at least we flesh out, not based on biases that we come into it, but actually looking at the issue in an objective manner. And that would involve, for example, if somebody wants to question something in the Talmud, then of course we would look at the Talmud and the Jewish religious beliefs and about the Talmud, and how they really believe about it, and they analyze it that way, and likewise the New Testament, to look at it that way. I think those are the proper conclusions from his lecture. Now, I have hinted to some issues, and I guess today we're going to be pretty short. Maybe we'll take some questions from other people listening. But what I would like to do now is I'd like to discuss, in view of what Dr. Brown said, obviously there, I would like to discuss what my approach is. And it's an approach that I feel is not just for Jewish counter-missionaries, like myself, or apologists for Judaism, which is what I consider myself more of, but would deal also for missionaries themselves. I think there are certain things that are basic and I think really have to be used in these kinds of discussions, because let's basically understand that there are very few things that are as personal and important to a person as the religious beliefs. So when we're discussing somebody's religious beliefs, we have to approach it in a certain way that recognizes how important the issues are. After all, Christians believe that I'm going to hell, so that's quite an important issue when I'm discussing with a Christian to explain to him why, in fact, it's not the case. And of course, we believe that missionaries who convert Jews are also going to hell, so it's a very serious issue here involved. This is not a game. These involve very important, earth-shattering, and very, significant issues. So let me give you what my basic approach is. I would love to say that I do it 100% of the time, but sometimes I may veer away from it, and I'm sure some people listening to this will say, Moshe, you're wrong on that one. Rabbi, you said something, you weren't keeping to your approach. But this is what I try and do. Number one is I don't discuss issues that I don't know about well. Don't fake it, okay? Take the time to do the research. Our next lecture series, which is to be a number of lectures, number of shows here, we will deal with the New Testament, the canon, how it came about, and everything like that. It will become obvious from you. I don't have to brag about how much time I spent on it, but it will become obvious from you, to anybody listening to it, that I've spent a considerable amount of time studying it. Evangelical scholars, and also secular scholars, by the way, but evangelical scholars. And so it's very important that when you are dealing with an issue such as that you really take the time and study the issues in depth. We'll see again when we talk about the Trinity, see that I've actually spent a lot of time with books and with lectures on people explaining exactly what the Trinity is about, the theological and philosophical underpinnings of it. Okay, and again, when you're doing it, you have to look at the best explanations. With regards to the Trinity and a lot of things, there are very superficial things out there. Avoid superficiality. Go to the best. Try and find the best sources you can, and look at those. And those are the ones used to challenge Christians. So, like for example, on the other side, when you're going to question about contradictions in the New Testament, something like that, look at the best works that exist out there on answering contradictions. The book Hard Sayings in the Bible. Gleason Arsha's book is good. Giesler and Howell has a good book. These are classic texts that deal with problems in the New Testament, the Tanakh in general, look at those, see them clearly, understand what these people are saying before you actually bring out and discuss the issues. Know your topic very well, know it inside and out, and try then deal with an issue. If you don't know it that well, just basically stay away from it. Okay, they're the best example. Number 2, scholars. Scholars are a mixed bag. One of the things that I find the biggest problem I have with Dr. Brown's book is he appeals to scholars, where we know actually that mainstream scholarship does not accept the New Testament, does not accept the New Testament's dating, authorship, or a whole bunch of other things about the New Testament. Doesn't accept the resurrection. I mean, there's lots of things in the New Testament that scholars don't accept. Now, from both sides, I don't accept scholars' words on their own. What is important about scholars sometimes is that they have certain skills and knowledge. So, for example, I am not a Greek scholar, though I know Hebrew quite well. So if a Greek word or something comes up, then, of course, appealing to a scholar's discussion of the Greek word as it's used, particularly in the New Testament, for example, would be something you can apply. The conclusion coming from a scholar is no more or less valid than your own conclusion if you base it on the same lists of facts. And the facts take it a certain way, then you agree. If facts don't, then you don't. I recall having a discussion years ago, I used to be able to in the 90s, on the internet when it was just starting out. There used to be email lists where reputable scholars and non-scholars would get together and you could discuss issues. And one of the issues, and this will come out, we'll discuss this again when we get to Rabbinic Judaism, but one of the issues came out discussing about the Pharisees in the time of Josephus, how influential they were. And a number of the scholars there mentioned, well, there's a passage in Josephus says there were only a few thousand of them, so obviously most of the people were not Pharisees. To which case I opened up that passage in Josephus we read before, where it said that the people followed whatever the Pharisees had to say. And I pointed out, how does that mix one with another? What is the meaning? And we talk about Rabbinic Judaism later, I will go into it more. But the point of the matter is scholars, facts, yes, but conclusions, not necessarily. If the conclusions follow from the facts, and of course it's very good to follow them, it's very good, they might point out to you directions to go, conclusions. But again, nothing will take the place of logical analysis, examination, and a search for truth based on the facts that we have here. Okay, so that's where I come with scholars. I don't totally throw them in the garbage, although there's certain scholars whose works I don't really think very much of. But in any case, what I do look is I do look at scholars and specifically what are the facts that they bring to the table and then where these facts lead. Number 3, and this is one that's important, it's more to counter missionaries, but missionaries do the same thing. Don't bring far out ideas. Okay? When it comes to bringing a concept and an idea to the table, to a discussion, bring things that have high degrees of plausibility. There's a book I haven't mentioned, which is called deals with what's called plausible logic, meaning it formalizes the ways of looking at arguments and analyzing as to whether a piece of information will make that argument more or less truthful, more or more plausible. Sometimes we don't know 100% truth, so we have to do what's more plausible, what's more possible. You'll see this when it comes on because I will be using this consistently. It's basically my approach to social sciences, where we don't really know 100% about a lot of things. What we do is we have certain facts and we have to bring the most plausible conclusion of the facts. So that, for example, even if there's something that's just based by a scholar, it's not the scholar, it's the plausibility of the argument. And of course, what we're going to find is, the truth of the matter is in many things, especially historical things, we don't have 100% certainty about a lot of things. And to admit that you don't have 100% certainty is nothing wrong with that. But we do have to deal with what's plausible, what's the most plausible thing that happened. And that will, of course, come up many times in our discussions throughout, when there are many issues for which there is no certainty as to whether certain things, and we discuss it.
Right.
Also, when we're talking about far-right ideas, there's a lot of them. Let me do one that's from the missionary side. Excuse me, the counter-missionary side, which I have I disagree with a lot, and I never bring it up, but we do see it. There is a number of works out there comparing the Trinity with other pagan beliefs where they have three types of gods, or the incarnation, comparing it to the idea of God-men in Greece, Rome, and Egypt. To say that Christianity borrowed directly from that, meaning that they said, oh, these people have this and we have it also, which I have seen in a few places going actually that far as to say that. There is no basis of it. In fact, the problem with that is a very important logical fallacy, which says just because two things come together doesn't mean there's causation between one and the two. They might not correlate. Now, my belief on this subject is actually something I'm going to be later on when we talk about the Trinity, as to where I think the Trinity actually came into. But saying causality just because some pagans had certain beliefs, obviously the Christians, is just, it's not really logically valid. It's not a logical argument, and it lacks a certain degree of plausibility, unless you could actually show that you can actually give a proof of a direct correlation where that could actually come into. Christianity, for example, if Paul had been a devotee of Isis, and not Isis, the terrorist argument, but Isis, the god of Egypt, and which there's a trinity there. And if Paul had been that, you might begin to have an argument to say that, maybe that's where Paul got his stuff from. But since that's not the case, a direct connection cannot be found, and it fails in plausibility, and it seems a little bit far out to me. But we'll discuss where actually I believe the Trinity came from, and I think it's very interesting to know. Okay, the last thing I'd like to do, which is, again, for those of us who are counter-missionaries, we get complained and said about us that we teach sometimes what they refer to as anti-missionary Judaism. What that is really, there is somewhat, and some people who do counter-missionary work, I'm not talking about the professional people that I know of, because I'm not aware of any instance of that, but I do see sometimes people, unprofessional, ad hoc people, who will say things about Judaism, but having a lack of knowledge of what Judaism actually is. The most reputable people, of course, don't have that, but it is something that's out there, and it's something that happens, you find in some books also. So what does it mean, anti-missionary Judaism? I think there's a few things that are out there. Number one is giving ad hoc answers that are not really based on Jewish sources. One of the things you will find in what I say here, that if you know Jewish sources, you'll find that there's actually a lot of agreement to what I say with Jewish sources.
Right.
In many cases, I can show you whether it's a biblical interpretation. Those who have read my Isaiah 53 will see that, in fact, there's nothing that I say there which not only doesn't follow exactly what the verses say, but you'll also find I can show you that it's actually rabbis actually agree with what I'm saying. It's a consistency. Okay, that's extremely important. If you are saying something that's inconsistent with rabbinic Judaism and trying to say that that's the way the truth is, giving ad hoc answers, that ends up actually being somewhat of a problem. You should always try to be consistent as much as possible, and consistent with the verses say. Okay. Likewise, when you're discussing about the Tanakh, it's very important to get in and really understand what we call in Hebrew the pshat, the simple meaning of the text. What is the text trying to say, as opposed to other kinds of interpretations that exist there, which are not meant to explain the verses, but just use them for lessons to learn out of it. In scholarly literature, we talk about the difference between exegesis and eisegesis. Exegesis means interpreting what the verse actually means and meant, which is pretty close to what the word pshat means. Understanding what the actual verse means, as opposed to eisegesis means using the verse outside of what its meaning is for other things, which is a lot of Midrashic literature. While the theological points are saying it's true, they are not an exegesis of the verse, but an eisegesis of the verse. So it's very important that when we deal with verses and we deal with things, the New Testament also, obviously when I'm going to be criticizing the New Testament, and also somebody who wants to deal with the Talmud, has to deal with what actually the verse, what it actually says there, as opposed to taking it out of context. So that's basically what I wanted to cover. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to start a whole new series of lectures, and in it we're going to discuss about the New Testament, sources for it, how it came about, the canon, and basically why a person who is a truth seeker should not rely upon that for their soul in the world to come.
Right.
Okay, I think I will leave it here. If there are some questions, or, William, if anybody actually calls in, I can take for a couple minutes, or if there's some questions in the box, I'll take it. But that's basically what I wanted to do, my conclusion here.
Okay, I'm reading one right now that was tagged by Justin123. I'm trying to understand his question here. Hang on one second.
Okay.
It says, ask the rabbi about the Jews before they became Abyssinian Christians, having...
Who?
Abyssinians, Abassynien.
Is he talking about the Ethiopians?
I have no idea. We'd have to have him to clarify. But
what's his question?
It says, ask the rabbi about Jews before they became Abyssinian Christians, having our oral Torah. He disagrees but never responds to my email on it.
Who?
A guy. Well, people
who never
have,
responds to him.
People have YouTube names that don't match their email addresses. So I don't know if you'll be able to identify.
What he's talking about is the Ethiopians.
Okay.
This discussion we'll talk about very much. I discussed about it. It's mentioned in an article I have online about the oral law.
Okay.
And stuff like that. I'll give a very short answer. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is very unique. It's unique in that it practices circumcision. It follows many of the Old Testament laws. And those people who say they are Abyssinian, Ethiopian, Abyssinia is the name for Ethiopia, by the way. There's a lot of controversy about that. I will be open here and say that my view is that based on the historical records that I know of, the Ethiopian Jews cannot trace themselves back.
Rabbi, let me jump in real fast. He just sent a clarification. It says these Christians had, not Ethiopians, but he said these Christians had the Mishnah, and you say they did not. But I found evidence that they had some oral Torah. Well, just for me to comment on that, there's evidence in the New Testament alone that the New Testament followers knew about the oral Torah, Sabbath day's journey, all these other things. So there's no denying that.
You have to make a distinction here, and this is very important.
Okay.
The New Testament, that it should be, remember, there's a lot of discussions there, is the Pharisees the main foil for Jesus there. Mentions the Sadducees and others, but the main foil is the Pharisees. And as we saw from Josephus, basically to say somebody's a Pharisee is to basically say that they were a regular Orthodox Jew, which is what they were. So it's not unusual that you will find things of the oral law there, the Torah Shabbat Peh, which we call it, but basically oral tradition, stuff like that, in the New Testament, because basically that was what was going on there in Palestine at the time. Judea at the time was called that, later called Palestine by the Roman Emperor Hadrian when he destroyed the temple and made it a pagan city. Jerusalem pagan city for a while. Now the Ethiopians have a very different type of thing. Having oral traditions does not mean that you have our oral law, which goes back, as Josephus says, from his time, saying that as far as 2 centuries before him, the Pharisees in that time had already had oral traditions going back for a long time before that. So this is we have a straightway tradition that we know, documentary-wise, going back 2 to 3 centuries before the Common Era. Okay, that documentary we can get by because Josephus pushes it back that far. Other hints we're going to see when I talk about oral law that there are actually other things besides that, but this we can document back that far. The Ethiopian church has a problem because they do have their own traditions and stuff like that. The problem with the Ethiopian church is very simple. The Ethiopian Christian church was very Judaized. For example, when we do discuss about the canon, you find out that the Ethiopian church accepted the Book of Jubilees as part of the canon. Jubilees is very much filled with legal material, okay? And they take things from there. The Book of Enoch, for example, is another thing that they have there. A few other things.
Right. Just enjoy the chime.
In general. I know. I'm just waiting for that, but I also
you're fine.
That tells me it's time for me to drink again. Okay.
Good.
The main problem, it's just to tell you Mashiach's a little bit closer to coming. That's why you have a clock like that.
There you go. Your
mind is getting closer. So, anyways, let's go back to the Ethiopian church. The Ethiopian church is very different, very interesting from all the churches that there is. That is the most Judaized church. Because it took Jubilees as part of the canon and followed it, they have a lot of customs. They hold the laws of women who become, they come to the monthly period. They follow that also. These are things that are common there. When we get to that, I'll try and go over those issues again. What the problem with the Ethiopians as far as Judaic heritage is this. Haile Selassie, who was the last emperor of Ethiopia, Abyssinia, from whom he claimed to trace his ancestry back all the way to King Solomon, saying that he was from the tribe of Judah. Now, when it came to later on, one Jewish scholar, when was asked about with regards to someone who was an Ethiopian who was a slave, you're not allowed to keep a Jew as a slave, so you're allowed to keep a slave who was Jewish, asked about them, and he allowed them, he forbid them, because they said they came from the tribe of Dan. Okay, so that's the difference between what they were saying, what he did. So there's a lot of controversy in that, a lot of legal controversies in that, and who was involved in there. So I'm not going to go into all that stuff. So with the Ethiopians, there's a lot of questions about it. Are they really of Jewish ancestry? And we have a general rule as far as it comes with identity. If you don't know, then, you obviously have to convert. There's a lot of Jews, for example, in South America. It's quite certain that many, many Jews in South America have Jewish blood because many of the Jews in Spain, when it came to forced conversions, fled to South America, either from Spain or from Portugal. So there is a lot of people there who definitely have Jewish blood. And it may actually end up that somebody has Jewish ancestry from mother to mother to mother to mother. But because you can't really prove it, we would require such a person to convert because we don't really know what they are. We have no way of knowing, for certainty what they are, so it involves in conversion. So the Ethiopian church is a very interesting situation. Their oral traditions are basic oral traditions in many ways are not different from what the Catholic, their Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox Church has. I hope that gives the answer. It's a little bit of a long-winded thing, but it's a very complex issue. And unfortunately, it also gets into a lot of politics and a lot of things which makes it more controversial because of that. But the factual matter is that there are a lot of similarities between the customs from the Jewish people who consider them Jewish in Ethiopia and the non-Jewish people in Ethiopia.
Okay.
Any other question before?
I'm actually scanning the YouTube now. That was kind of the main thing. Good shout out to George Anthony Hall out there. Thank you for pretty smart fellow. He jumps in from time to time. So Bill Smiley, good to see you guys. Justin 123, Kelvin, a lot of viewers tonight. So thank you guys for tuning in. So next week, you guys really don't want to miss. y'all really don't want to miss next week. Next week we're turning the page. We're going into a different chapter. And Rabbi, do you want to tease them on what they're looking forward to?
Next week is basically where we're going to deal head on with an issue that a lot of counter missionaries don't. It does take a place in a lot of polemical arguments. We're going to take on the New Testament itself. We're going to take on the New Testament. Is it really scripture? Should you bet your soul on it? Is it something that's reliable? Is it something that you can really look at to follow for your own life?
That's
so
good.
We're going to do that. We'll see how the New Testament came about, where it came from, sources, what predominantly what evangelical scholars who actually study the subject and teach in evangelical colleges, people who are evangelicals would believe what they actually say, as opposed to what you might think that they would be saying. It'll be interesting. I think there'll be a lot of things that people haven't.
Absolutely. Rabbi Moshe Shulman, outreach at judaismsanswers.com. judaismsanswers.com. And you can go to the website.
Singular.
Answer singular. Oh, really? Well, if you haven't been getting emails, maybe that's why. I thought it was Judaism's Answers. I've got a typo there. So the website would also be Judaism's Answer, single answer. .com. Very good. Okay, so I'll have to change that for next week. So we'll make sure to get that right. So thank you guys for tuning in. Rabbi, thank you for your time. This is always very enlightening, and I know we're all looking forward to seeing what next week has to bring. And so thank you very much, and thank you for all you people who are watching. Mitch, good to see you, buddy. Thank you for all my YouTube moderators. You guys are really helpful. I can't monitor everything, and sometimes we get people on the YouTube channel that really don't need to be on the YouTube channel. So it's nice to have somebody watching my back from time to time. So I appreciate that very much. All righty then, all that one breath. Rabbi, you have a great... Oh, I just saw you yawn. Now it's coming. I got to play the music before I start yawning.
It's getting late.
It's definitely late.
Before Passover. We're very busy before Passover.
There you go. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rabbi. We'll talk to you soon. Shalom, shalom, everybody.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד